So we've got Amsterdam 2022. Watched this last night. Directed by David O. Russell. Uh, American Hustle, Silver Linings Playbook. He's a director of renowned reputation. And I'm going to go through the cast, but it's a very, very ensembled cast. And I found it a little complicated linking all the cast members together, how they're related to each other. So this cast list will explain a little bit of that. Christian Bale stars as Berenson. He's a doctor and a ward veteran. Margot Robbie is Valerie Voss, aka Valerie Vandenberg, and she's a nurse. John David Washington is Harold Woodman, a lawyer and also a war veteran. Alexandra Nivola is Detective Hiltz. He's a detective assigned to a murder case and Gert Willer's partner. Andrea Riseborough is Beatrice van der Heuvel, Bert's estranged wife. Anya Taylor-Joy is Libby Voss, and she's Valerie's sister-in-law and Tom Voss's wife. Chris Rock plays Milton Keynes. He's a buddy, an army buddy of Bert and Harold. Matthias Schonat is Detective Getwiller, a detective assigned to the murder case, and Hiltz's partner. Michael Shannon is Henry Norcross, a US Naval Intelligence and a manufacturer of glass eyes, who is Canterbury's partner. Mike Myers is Paul Canterbury. He's an MI6 spy and manufacturer of glass eyes. Taylor Swift, she briefly appears as Elizabeth Meekins, the daughter of Bill Meekins, whose death results in both Berenson and Woodman being framed, Bert and Harold, respectively. Timothy Oliphant is Tony Milfax. He's the murderer hitman, and Zoe Zaldana plays Irma Sinclair. She's a medical examiner for the autopsy and becomes Bert's love interest. Rami Malek is Tom Voss, he's Valerie's brother and Libby's husband. And then Robert De Niro appears later on as Gilbert Dillenbeck. He's a Marine veteran based on the Marine Corps of General Smedley Butler. Ed Begley Jr. is Bill Meekins. We don't see much of Bill. He's Elizabeth's father, a US Army general whose death becomes the catalyst for events in the film. Then we've got Beth Grant, who plays Mrs. Dillenbach. Casey Biggs is Augustus van der Heuvel, Beatrice's father and Bert's father-in-law. Colin Camp is Eva Ott. Leland Orsa, Mr. Nevins. Tom Owen is Mr. Belport. And Day Young is Alvelia van der Havel, Beatrice's mother and Bert's mother-in-law. Okay, screenplay by David O. Russell. Cinematography by Emmanuel Lubecka. As I say, this is a review. I'm going to extract from this review by James Berardinello. With its whiplash-inducing tonal inconsistencies and sloppily assembled narrative, Amsterdam often feels like a pastiche of Monty Python, the Coen Brothers, or Wes Anderson grafted onto a crime caper espionage thriller with a strong allegory or message about fascism. This is more the freewheeling David O. Russell from American Hustle, which also spun its wheels early before settling down, rather than the disciplined filmmaker who made Silver Linings Playbook and The Fighter. It takes well over an hour before Amsterdam decides what it wants to be, and by that time viewers may be exasperated by the quirkiness and exhausted by the meandering, unfocused storyline. I found it quite intriguing trying to piece together the puzzle, so to speak. The story, an opening caption, informed us that a lot of this really happened, which fictionalises a Depression era conspiracy to replace FDR, that's Franklin Roosevelt, with a respected military man is not uninteresting. Uh, but it takes Russell too long to wade through the preliminaries. The movie doesn't start building momentum until Robert De Niro shows up, and that's more than an hour into the proceedings. Uh, uh, this reviewer, well, I think he's doing it a slight justice, and I'll come on to my comments in a bit. More to his, chronologically, Amsterdam begins during the final year of World War One, and that's where Bert, Harold, and Valerie meet. They're injured servicemen, and she's a nurse, of course. After the war, the threesome travel to Amsterdam, where they enjoy an idyllic break from reality before Valerie disappears after hearing that Bert wants to return to the US. Well, he does so with Harold in tow. The former wants to become a physician obsessed with repairing the disfigurement of war veterans, and he's suffered some pretty serious injuries himself. He has to wear a sort of a corset on his back, which is littered with wounds. The latter, however, wants to study law. 15 years later, Bert and Harold remain friends, but neither had seen Valerie since Amsterdam. However, things are about to change as she reappears. As I say, Bert and Harold are approached by Liz Meekins, the daughter of their commanding officer, Bert and Harold, General Bill Meekins, to investigate the circumstances surrounding his death. And contrary to the official cause of death, Liz believes he's been murdered, and that's the gist of the caper, so to speak. We then become acquainted again with Valerie, along with her brother Tom, brilliantly played by Rami Malek, and his wife. Tom wants to help and has powerful connections, but is unwilling to stick out his neck unless Bert and Harold can convince the revered Dylan Beck, played by De Niro, to speak out in their defence. Against Tom's wishes, Valerie accompanies the men when they leave. And then this is where the sort of Mel Brooks feel to the movie comes along. Bale's character is fascinating. He matches beat for beat by Robbie, whose farce goes back to her eye-opening turn in The Wolf of Wall Street. Washington is a bit of a straight man, a little bit like Bud Abbott to Bale's Costello. The supporting ensemble is crammed with recognisable names, and it attracts such great actresses as Andrea Riseborough, Alexandra Nivola, and Matthew Sunitz as the detectives, and an excellent supporting performance by Michael Shannon as secret agents, and a very brief appearance with an element of amusement by Chris Rock at the time that an autopsy is on the cards or on the table. The politics come later on, where the connections are made with this death possibly to do with the political fascist nationalism that was rising in the 30s in the States, trying to model itself on Mussolini, and implications that the death of Meekins was possibly to do with his having information that would embarrass that popular revolt and their apparent plan to replace Roosevelt, the president, and that's we get to that towards the end. Right, now I'm going to go through my notes that I made at the time of I watched the movie. We start off in New York City in 1933, and it's narrated by Bert, played by Christian Bale. And the three main leads, Bert, Valerie, and Harold, meet. Uh, they want Bert to carry out an autopsy on Meekins as a result of approached by the daughter. And they put some sort of pressure on Bert to do this. And he's a little reluctant, but eventually agrees to do it. Although time is restricted, so he has to carry it out in the mortuary quickly before the body is removed. And to complicate matters, then the daughter is killed in a road incident where she is pushed out in front of a vehicle as she's fleeing from so-called police. And we then flash back to 1911, where Bert's doing military service, and we capture the activities of the platoon, and we get introduced initially to the issue of racism, the war against the fascists, and it appears that the three of them then decide after the war to head off to Amsterdam. Bert, of course, is one eye less, so he has to find a glass eye. But ironically, the two men are both very physically attracted to Valerie, and they are very much a ménage à trois. She has a love for both of them. There's a great incident where they sing a song together to cement their friendship, and Valerie, in her role as nurse, has along the way in wartime been saving all the shrapnel that she's taken out of the bodies of the injured and the dead, and has used this to raise some much needed cash, and that's an interesting aside. And so to Amsterdam, which is a sort of a very leisurely part of the movie, and the script emphasises the calm after the harrowing war scenes, and they encourage each other really to take advantage of this good period in time, based on a sort of lurking fear that there's more to come, which of course is right with the rise of fascism in Italy and Germany in the 30s. Bert then returns to the US, which leads to Valerie's disappearance. And whilst he's in New York, he does have a temptation to quickly use some of the drugs that he has available on himself, becomes a bit of a junkie, eventually gets the glass eye, but the junk is to help him handle the terrible scars of war that are on his back. The police then become known to the two of them regarding this death, and become suspects in the death of Meekings. But there's in the background this sense of organised crime involvement with regard to how the man has died, and that's carried forth as Bert and Harold try to work their way towards gathering more information. Then they reunite with Valerie, who's been assigned to a mental institution, apparently based on her behaviour, a bizarre set of scenes. It is seen as she's reunited with her two buddies, and the reasons by the institutions with regard to the high quantity of medication that Valerie is under suggests that she's being kept there against her will, and she's not really mentally ill at all, but perhaps is a threat in terms of her wanting to investigate the death of Meekings. Eventually, she leaves with Bert and Harold, and we see some newsreel footage suggesting that veterans in the United States aren't being given proper financial support given their ordeal, and in fact are getting a really sticky end, which suggests that all is not well politically, which has given rise to this movement to possibly take the presidency of Roosevelt. The oppression is shown. We also see clearly America at this time in the 30s with segregation very evident, and we catch this in detail when Valerie shares with Harold the fact that although she's in love with him, that they could never be together as a married couple because of the law regarding segregation in the United States, which I think was a very apt point. We then hear about a character who is suggested to be undesirable because of the fact that he steals rare birds' eggs and is not to be trusted. And this person is Voss, played by Malik. So there's a certain hesitation when eventually he is met by Bert and Harold. Meanwhile, Dillenbach, played by De Niro, has appeared in the film, and a lot of pressure is being put on him to make a speech at an event that Voss is heavily involved, which is clearly anti-democratic and pro-fascist. He's taken a lot of time to decide whether he's going to be there and what sort of speech is he going to deliver to the veterans there with regard to staying with Roosevelt or leaning towards what could be construed as a coup. So The woman who conducted the autopsy, who's a love interest of Bert, is beaten up by figures unknown, but she's clearly in position to offer evidence that Meeking's death wasn't in fact an accident and that he had been poisoned. And it suggested that the beating is to silence her. And this alarms Bert somewhat with the extent of her injuries. So you can see that the film becomes quite complex. The police are back again, questioning Bert and Harold, and there's a scene which leads to a sort of quid pro quo. We'll tell you what we know if you tell us what we know. And this tends to shift the police opinion towards one of a possible cover-up or corruption rather than a straight case of Bert and Harold being responsible for this crime. We see a bizarre street scene which I enjoyed, where two Negro men are singing a gospel style a cappella, which is enchanting. And Chris Rock, his intervention, starts to paint a grim picture of the story unfolding for Bert and Harold and linking to organised crime. Shannon is particularly 5-star in as much that he, as a Secret Service senior, appears to be in league with the possible coup attempt against Roosevelt. And he makes a point about cuckoos having no houses, used as a metaphor for human behaviour. Not quite sure what that means, but it may be an indication that the coup attempt is a metaphor for stealing the White House away from the population, just as the cuckoo steals the eggs away from the birds within its grasp. And then we get the pre-Second World War with Bilderberg speech, and at the venue there are a number of German, I guess that soldiers is probably the wrong term. They're certainly in uniform, and they're extremely sort of pro-Nazi, and make a hell of a noise to shout down Bilderberg, as his speech tends to lead towards democracy rather than dictatorship. Valerie explains her medical history, and it becomes quite evident that the doctors have been giving the meds deliberately to throw her off the scent. There's just a bizarre scene in the street, and she gets a little forceful with Bert after collapsing the effect of the drugs, and a neighbour heckles from nearby, but it reminds us that this woman has been drugged. There's a discussion between the three of them, which I thought was very poignant, when they discuss the vital ingredient of love, of needing love, or being without love, in respect of their own predicament. We're then moving on to the finale now, and we catch a glimpse of the obvious sexual attraction between Valerie and Harold as they snatch a kiss. Uh, but they have to be very cautious not to be seen, but are determined to continue on in the fight for freedom and their own happiness. The committee of five, who were regarded and finger pointed as responsible for this possible coup attempt against Roosevelt, they disappear without trace. And we then reach very much a conclusion with Bert staying, but Valerie is forced to flee the US, and so they're separated. But she goes along with Harold because they become targets for having basically interfered with this plan. Bert, however, stays to continue fighting for democracy, and that's. We then learn that this is loosely based on the truth events that took place in the US between the wars. I found it a thoroughly gripping movie. Although at times, as I say, it was a bit complicated working out who was related to who and who linked up with whom. By the end, I just about grabbed it, and the ensemble cast offering an array of strong performances. Bale particularly, and Margot Robbie and Washington in the three leads, and then great supporting work by De Niro, Rami Malek, and Michael Shannon. I thoroughly recommend this movie, and it certainly would deserve a second viewing.